Okay, so you want to own a sugar mill. Endless rows of cane in South Florida, trucks rolling in through the night, white smoke rising above the stacks. Pure white sugar streams out at the other end, bagged, boxed, and shipped across America. And the federal government is quietly keeping the price up for you. That is the picture in your head. And honestly, it is not a bad one. Owning the sweetest, most protected commodity in the country. What could go wrong? Here's what the brochure doesn't tell you. The mill runs 6 months a year. Your costs run 12. And your revenue depends on a single line in the farm bill. A sugar mill is not really a food business. It is a political business that happens to turn cane into crystals. The moment you understand that difference, everything about how these mills make money and how they quietly die starts to make sense. Before you sign anything, understand this. There are four completely different businesses that all call themselves sugar mills, and you can go bankrupt just by confusing one for another. The first is the raw sugar mill. Truckloads of freshly cut cane arrive at the yard, get crushed between massive rollers, and the juice is boiled down into raw brown crystals. That raw sugar is not what you buy at the supermarket. It is an industrial intermediate product, sold by the ton to refineries that turn it into the white stuff on your table. The second business is exactly that refinery. It buys raw sugar in bulk, dissolves it, filters it, recrystallizes it, and packages it. No fields, no harvest calendar, no weather risk. A refinery is basically a chemical plant. A raw mill is basically a farm with a boiler attached. They share a name, they share a product, and they share almost nothing else. The third business is the vertically integrated grower-miller refiner. This is the Fanjul family model in South Florida. You own the land, the cane, the mill, the refinery, and the brand. Florida Crystals and ASR Group sit at the top of this pyramid. They control everything from the field to the box of Domino sugar in your kitchen, and that control is where the margin actually lives. The fourth business is the beet sugar processor. Different plant, different geography, different politics. Beets grow in cold northern states like Minnesota, North Dakota, and Michigan, processed almost entirely by grower-owned cooperatives. American Crystal Sugar is not one company owned by shareholders. It is a co-op owned by roughly 2,000 farmers. And the economics work in a completely different direction from cane. So when someone says they want to own a sugar mill, the first question is never how much. It is which sugar, which region, and do you understand what you actually just bought? Now let's talk about location. Because in this industry, geography is not a preference. Geography is destiny, and it decides whether your mill lives or quietly closes its gates. Florida is cane country. Warm, wet, flat, and pressed against the Everglades. The soil is muck, black, and rich, and the harvest window runs from October through late March, about 6 months long. Louisiana is also cane country, but the model there is different. Independent growers, family farms, hundreds of them selling into a smaller number of mills, most of which are cooperatively owned by the growers themselves. You do not just walk into Louisiana and buy a mill. You buy a relationship with dozens of growers, each with their own contracts, their own quirks, and their own opinions about what you should pay them. Hawaii used to be cane country, past tense. The last commercial sugar mill in Hawaii closed at the end of 2016, and we will come back to that funeral later in the video. The Midwest is beet country. Different crop, different harvest window, different labor market, different politics. And Puerto Rico, once the largest producer in the Americas, is essentially out of the sugar game entirely. Every one of these regions has its own rules, its own quota allocation, its own local labor market, its own century-old political relationship with Washington that cannot be moved or copied. You cannot copy a Florida business plan into Louisiana. You cannot copy a Louisiana plan into Minnesota. And if you try to run a Hawaii plan anywhere, you already know how that story ends. Here is the catch that catches most first-time buyers. They assume that buying a sugar mill is like buying a factory. You pay for the land, the equipment, the building, and it is yours. That is not what you are buying? Not really. Look at the balance sheet of any surviving American sugar operation, and the physical mill is often the least interesting asset on the list. What you are actually buying is a bundle of very old, very specific, very unfair advantages that took 100 years and a lot of dinners in Washington to accumulate. You are buying an allocation from the USDA that tells you how much sugar you are allowed to sell each year. Without that allocation, your mill is a very expensive metal building sitting on muck. You are buying long-term transport contracts with railroads or trucking firms. Sugar is heavy, cane is heavier. Move it wrong, and your margin disappears before the boiler is even fired up. You are buying decades-old relationships with the growers who feed you. If they decide to sell their cane to the mill down the road, your 6-month harvest window has some very expensive empty days. You are buying a seat at a very small, very old table. That seat, not the machinery, is what has value. Read that again. A first-time buyer sees $100 million of steel, boilers, evaporators, and centrifugals. A veteran sees $100 million of paper, permits, contracts, and quota. Only one of them is right. So the entry price to this business is not the mill itself. It is the political and legal architecture wrapped around the mill. And that architecture is not for sale on the open market. You buy it by acquiring an existing operator. And even then, quota rights and marketing allotments do not transfer as freely as land or steel. The USDA gets to look at you first. Which brings us to what you actually pay. A small independent raw mill in Louisiana might trade for $50 to $80 million, mostly for the growing base and the aging equipment inside. A mid-sized integrated operation in Florida, with quota, land, and refinery capacity, climbs into the hundreds of millions. And the Fanjul tier assets, the ones with global reach, are effectively priceless because they never sell. So, write this down. You are not buying a factory. You are buying a seat at a very small, very old table. And the table is not accepting new guests. The map of American sugar has not been redrawn in decades. Every seat is taken, every quota is spoken for, every corridor of political access is claimed. You either buy from someone who wants out, or you inherit the seat, or you build a beet processor in a state that still has room. There is no fourth option that has ever worked. That is the terrain. Now we get to the part of this business that most first-time buyers completely miss, because it is invisible on the site tour and buried in the fine print of the operations report. The cost of running the mill 12 months a year, and the reality that it only earns money during 6 of them. That is where most first-timers actually go under. Here is the number that stops most first-time buyers cold, if they ever get honest with it. The mill grinds cane for about 6 months a year. Your electricity bill, your loan payment, your insurance, and your salaried staff run for 12. Grinding season in Florida starts in October and ends in late March or early April. In Louisiana, it is compressed even tighter, roughly October through mid-January. Beyond those windows, the cane is either not ready or already spoiling in the field. During grinding season, the mill runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It does not stop. Trucks arrive in convoys, boilers stay lit, crews rotate through 12-hour shifts, and the yard never really sleeps. Then it stops. Just like that. The last truck rolls in, the rollers wind down, the boilers go cold, and the mill sits silent for 6 months while the next crop grows in the fields. Except it does not really sit silent. That is the illusion. Off-season is when the entire mill gets torn apart, inspected, rebuilt, and put back together. Because if something breaks in October, you are already dead. Let's break down what actually costs money during those quiet months. The boiler is not just switched off. It is a high-pressure steam system. Every year, it needs a full internal inspection, tube cleaning, and often partial retubing. That one job alone runs between $3 and $8 million annually for a mid-size mill. And that is if nothing catastrophic is found. If a boiler tube ruptured during the season, add another 2 to 5. The mill rollers are the heart of the crushing house. Massive grooved steel cylinders that squeeze the juice out of the cane. Under continuous load, they wear down. They need to be pulled and reground every off-season. Regrinding a set of rollers costs roughly $200,000 to $500,000, and a full mill tandem has 3 or 4 sets. That is $1 million in maintenance before you have crushed a single stalk. Then the evaporators, the centrifugals, the clarifiers, the conveyors. Every one of them has a maintenance schedule, and every one of them has a habit of finding new problems the day the crew opens the housing. Now, labor. Sugar is one of the most labor-intensive industries left in American agriculture. Cane cutters, mill operators, boiler techs, chemists, mechanics, truck drivers, some seasonal, some year-round, all of them expensive. The cane cutters are mostly H-2A visa workers, brought in from the Caribbean and Central America. Wages run somewhere between $15 and $18 an hour, plus housing, plus transportation, plus federal compliance costs. Housing is not a small item. Every H-2A worker requires certified employer-provided housing, which means dormitories, kitchens, and inspections. For a mid-sized operation, that is a small town you have to build and maintain. Then, the salaried staff who stay year-round. Plant managers, chief engineers, agronomists, accountants, USDA compliance officers. These people do not go home when the mill goes quiet. They just switch from operations to maintenance mode. And the fields. Your cane grows for the other 6 months. That means irrigation, drainage, fertilizer, weed control, pest management, and pre-harvest planning. In the Everglades, drainage alone is a full-time engineering problem. Property tax on thousands of acres, federal, state, and local. Insurance on the mill, the land, the equipment, the workers, and the trucks. Every one of these lines runs 12 months a year, whether the boiler is lit or not. So the picture is starting to shape up. 12 months of costs, 6 months of revenue. And you have not even asked the ugliest question yet, which is when exactly that revenue actually shows up in your bank account. Now here is where the naive mental model really breaks. You grind cane, you make sugar, you ship it, you get paid. In your head, that happens the same week. In reality, it happens 2 to 4 months later. Sugar buyers, especially industrial ones, pay on net 60 to net 120 terms, which means the sugar you shipped in November is money you might see in February, assuming they do not push the invoice further. Meanwhile, you have been paying the growers all season long. Cane payments are structured around delivery. When their trucks unload at your yard, they expect a check within days, not months. Read that again. You pay for the cane immediately. You get paid for the sugar 60 to 120 days later. And you do this while running a plant that costs $1 million a week to operate. That gap has a name. It is called working capital, and it will kill you before anything else in this business kills you. Every American sugar operation has a huge working capital line of credit for exactly this reason. Most independent mills borrow tens of millions of dollars each season, just to bridge the gap between paying the growers and getting paid by the buyers. That interest is a real cost that never shows up in the brochure. And the trap inside the trap. Growers, watching the industry consolidate around them, often insist on retainage. A portion of their payment gets held until the end of the season, contingent on sugar recovery yields and final pricing. That retainage is your one moment of leverage. But it also means the growers are, in effect, your involuntary lenders. If you use their money to survive, you had better be able to pay it back when the season closes. Now, the off-season disaster scenario. You are 3 weeks into January, and one of your boilers fails. Not a small failure. A tube bundle ruptures under pressure. Emergency shutdown, half your grinding capacity gone. You now have 2 options. Repair fast and lose 2 weeks of grinding. Or run at half capacity for the rest of the season. Either way, you are looking at 10 to 15% of your annual revenue erased. That is the entire margin of a healthy year. Wiped out by one failure in 1 week. In an industry that gives you 6 months to earn it back. And you cannot earn it back. The window is not extendable. The cane keeps ripening whether your boiler is fixed or not. Once it passes peak sucrose content, every day it sits in the field is sugar you are literally watching decay in real time. Let that land for a moment. This is why sugar mill owners talk about the harvest window the way surgeons talk about a golden hour. You are inside it or you are outside it. And outside it, nothing you do matters. So the off-season is not a rest. It is a war of preparation, run against a countdown timer, funded by a working capital line, staffed by people who know that a missed deadline in September becomes a lost year in April. This is why sugar mills do not fail during the off-season. They fail because of the off-season, because they underestimated a boiler inspection, because they misjudged a rebuild, because they ran out of credit and could not start on time. A sugar mill does not fail in production, it fails in preparation. And by the time you notice the failure, it is already too late in the calendar to fix it. And even if you nail the preparation, even if your mill runs like a Swiss watch for 6 months straight, you still have not addressed the question that actually determines whether any of this makes money at all, which is the question we will get to next. Why does the entire American sugar industry even exist at the price point it does? The answer is not efficiency. The answer is written in Washington. Here is the number that you need to sit with before we go any further. Sugar sells inside the United States for roughly 35 to 45 cents a pound. On the world market, it sells for 18 to 22. Every American mill, every American refinery, every American sugar operation earns almost double per pound compared to their global competitors. And they have earned that premium, uninterrupted, for the last 90 years running. That premium is not the result of superior technology. American mills are not more efficient than Brazilian ones. In many cases, they are less. Brazilian mills use bigger scale, cheaper labor, and better cane genetics. The premium is a policy. Specifically, it is a bundle of 4 instruments written into the Farm Bill that together are called the U.S. Sugar Program. Every one of them is designed to keep foreign sugar out and domestic sugar priced high. The first instrument is marketing allotments. The USDA looks at expected domestic demand each year, then divides that number among American sugar producers as an allocation. Each mill gets a slice. Sell more than your allotment, and you lose it. This is quiet, elegant supply control. It ensures American production never floods the domestic market, which would collapse prices. It also ensures new entrants cannot just start producing sugar and undercut the incumbents by scale. The second instrument is tariff rate quotas, or TRQs. Foreign sugar can enter the United States, but only in limited quantities per year, per country. Beyond those quotas, imported sugar faces tariffs that make it commercially useless. The World Trade Organization forced the United States to accept some minimum access from countries like Brazil, Thailand, and Australia. That minimum is a fraction of what those countries could actually supply. The rest is blocked at the border. The third instrument is price support loans. If the market price of domestic sugar falls below a set loan rate, mills can hand their sugar over to the USDA as loan collateral, essentially selling it to the government at a guaranteed floor. That means American mills are never really exposed to the full downside of a sugar crash. The federal government is a buyer of last resort, sitting quietly behind every ton of sugar produced in the country. The fourth instrument is the Feedstock Flexibility Program. If domestic sugar starts to pile up, the USDA buys the surplus and hands it to ethanol producers to be converted into fuel, keeping it out of the food market entirely. So there are, in effect, four separate walls holding up the price of American sugar: import walls, allocation walls, floor walls, and diversion walls. Every one of them independently, and all four together, make a downside crash practically impossible. Read that again. It is practically impossible to lose money in American sugar because of falling prices. Because falling prices are structurally not allowed to happen for very long. You can still lose money the way any operator loses money. Bad management, wrong geography, a boiler that fails at the wrong week. But the raw market risk that destroys businesses in unregulated commodities does not really exist here. This is not an accident. It is the business model. Now let's talk about the family that understood this earlier and better than anyone else. The Fanjul family. Two brothers, Alfie and Pepe, running an empire out of West Palm Beach that controls roughly 40% of American cane sugar. The Fanjuls arrived in Florida in the early 1960s, refugees from Castro's Cuba, where their family had been sugar barons for generations. They rebuilt the empire from scratch in the Everglades, and today it stretches from Belle Glade to the Dominican Republic to London. Their operations, under the Florida Crystals and ASR Group umbrella, own tens of thousands of acres of cane, multiple mills, refineries, and the Domino and C&H consumer brands. It is one of the most vertically integrated food operations in the world. But that is not what makes them powerful. What makes them powerful is Washington. The Fanjul family and the sugar industry they anchor are among the most consistent political donors in American agriculture, decade after decade. They donate to both parties, aggressively and openly. Republicans, Democrats, House, Senate, committees, PACs. Sugar money flows in every direction. It is not partisan. It is defensive. There is a well-known anecdote from 1996 surfaced during the Clinton impeachment investigation that Alfie Fanjul once called President Clinton directly at the White House during a personal crisis. The call went through immediately. The point is not the specific call. The point is what the call symbolizes. Access. The kind of access that has been carefully cultivated across every administration since sugar policy was first written into the Farm Bill in 1934. Every 5 years, when the Farm Bill comes up for renewal in Congress, the sugar program is one of the most fiercely defended programs in the entire package. It has survived every attempt to reform it. Every single one. Free market Republicans hate it. Progressive Democrats hate it. Consumer advocates hate it. Cereal manufacturers hate it. Coca-Cola hates it. And every 5 years, it passes anyway, because the sugar lobby is one of the most disciplined in Washington. Now, here is the structural observation. If you buy a sugar mill in America, you are not just buying a mill. You are buying into a political architecture that has held for 9 decades against overwhelming free market opposition on both sides. That architecture is your real asset. It is the reason your product sells at double the world price. It is the reason your downside is bounded. It is the reason your competitors cannot flood the market from Brazil at will. But it also means your business is exposed to something no other manufacturer worries about. A single change in the Farm Bill, one revision to the allotment formula, one weakening of the TRQ regime, and the entire premium can collapse in a single legislative session. That is why sugar producers, more than almost any other American agricultural sector, spend serious money on lobbying, campaign contributions, and industry associations. They are not defending market share. They are defending the walls that make market share worth having. You are not competing on operational efficiency. You are competing on political access. And that market has been closed since 1934. Here is what that means for a first-time buyer with big ambitions. You do not disrupt sugar. You cannot disrupt sugar. There is no clever operational hack that lets you undercut the existing players, because the walls that protect their prices also protect yours. You either buy your way into the club on the club's terms, or you accept the smaller margins of the raw commodity fringe. There is no path around it. There is only the path through it, and the door is guarded. The cane grows in Florida. The real crop is grown in Washington. Which brings us to the second half of the answer. Because even if you understand the political architecture, you still have not seen the piece of the business that turns a modest sugar operation into a genuinely wealthy one. And that piece is not sugar at all. Now we get to the part of this business that actually explains why the Fanjuls are the Fanjuls, and why an ordinary raw sugar mill in Louisiana can be technically profitable but never wealthy. And it has almost nothing to do with sugar. Let's start with a walk through the mill. 100 tons of cane arrives on the trucks. It gets crushed. The juice goes one way, into the boiling house. The pulp goes another, into a huge conveyor headed straight for the boiler. Out of that 100 tons of cane, you get roughly 11 tons of raw sugar, roughly 30 tons of bagasse, the fibrous crushed pulp, roughly 4 tons of molasses, the dark syrup that will not crystallize, and a couple of tons of filter cake. An amateur looks at that flow and sees one product: sugar. Everything else looks like waste, or byproducts, or things you burn to get rid of them because otherwise they pile up in the yard. A professional looks at the same flow and sees 4 separate revenue streams, each with its own market, its own margin, and in some years its own tax subsidy. The sugar is just the largest of them. Let's start with the biggest hidden stream: bagasse. 30 tons of it per 100 tons of cane, coming off the rollers as a wet, fibrous, sugar-depleted pulp that used to be dumped in a pile out back and forgotten. That was the old model. The new model, the one the Fanjuls and every serious operator has adopted, is to burn the bagasse in high-pressure boilers to generate steam. That steam runs turbines. Those turbines generate electricity. The mill uses some of that electricity to run itself. Every crusher, every conveyor, every pump, every light in the plant runs on power generated by the pulp of your own cane. You buy zero electricity from the grid. Then, and this is where the money starts to appear, the mill sells the surplus electricity back to the grid under long-term power purchase agreements. You are no longer just a sugar company. You are also an energy company. Florida Crystals runs a cogeneration facility at Okeelanta in South Florida that produces around 140 megawatts. That is one of the largest biomass power stations in North America, and it is powered almost entirely by the mill's own agricultural waste. Think about that. A byproduct that used to be a disposal problem is now producing an Haisha clean electricity to power a small city, and every kilowatt of it sells at premium renewable energy rates, indexed to long-term contracts. Now, here is where the American policy stack gets very generous. Bagasse-fueled electricity qualifies as renewable biomass under federal and state programs. That means renewable energy credits, or RECs, that can be sold separately from the electricity itself. It means eligibility for the federal production tax credit under Section 45, which pays a per kilowatt-hour subsidy directly into your income statement. It means state-level clean energy mandates that force utilities to buy your power at long-term guaranteed prices. The margin structure on this energy stream is completely different from sugar. Sugar has volume, but its margin per pound is capped by policy. Cogen has structurally guaranteed offtake contracts, tax credits, and near-zero fuel cost, because your fuel is a byproduct you already had. For a large integrated operator, cogeneration can add $25 to $40 million a year in high-margin cash flow, on top of the sugar business. It is not the largest line on the income statement. It is one of the most profitable ones. Now the next stream, molasses. 4 tons per 100 tons of cane, the dark syrup that is left over after you have crystallized out as much sugar as you can economically extract from the juice. Molasses used to be considered a low-value output, sold cheap into cattle feed markets. That has changed. Today, molasses is sold into 3 separate high-margin channels, and mills that treat it as an afterthought are leaving real money on the table. The first channel is distillation. Rum, in particular, is made from molasses. Long-term supply contracts with distilleries, from Bacardi down to smaller craft rum operators, pay stable premium prices for guaranteed quality molasses year after year. The second channel is fuel ethanol. Molasses ferments and distills into ethanol as cheaply as any corn-based feedstock, and in some markets even cheaper. It is a natural fit for renewable fuel mandates. The third channel is high-end animal feed and food processing. Molasses is used as a natural sweetener in commercial baking, brewing, and specialty foods. Prices in these channels are significantly higher than bulk cattle feed rates. Depending on the year, molasses adds 8 to 12% to a well-managed mill's revenue, at margins that often exceed the sugar itself. Because unlike sugar, molasses pricing is not politically capped by any allotment. Now, the third stream. Filter cake, sometimes called mud or press mud, is the mineral-rich residue left after clarifying the juice. It looks like wet black dirt. It is treated like it too by most amateurs. Professionally managed operations run their filter cake back to the fields as organic fertilizer. That closes the nutrient loop, reducing the mill's fertilizer purchase costs by a meaningful amount every year. Some operations go further and sell filter cake into organic and specialty agriculture markets, where it commands real prices. It is not a huge revenue line, but it turns a cost of disposal into a modest profit center. Which brings us to the structural insight of this entire business. And it is the reason the Fanjuls and the surviving integrated operators dominate the industry the way they do, generation after generation. Sugar is what the government pays you to grow. Bagasse is what the market pays you to burn. Molasses is what the distillers pay you to ferment. Filter cake is what the fields pay you back for feeding them. Let that land for a moment. You are not running a sugar mill. You are running a 4-product biomass conversion facility, and only one of those 4 products is even sold in the food aisle. Read that again. This is the real reason vertical integration wins in sugar. Because a raw mill without cogeneration, without a molasses strategy, without a filter cake loop, is leaving 40 to 50% of its available revenue on the ground. A vertically integrated operator captures all 4 streams. A grower only captures none of the mill economics. A refiner only captures none of the biomass economics. Only the fully integrated player, the Fanjul tier operator, captures the whole cascade. That cascade is why some sugar operators quietly build generational wealth, while others struggle to break even though both are subject to the same USDA program, the same weather, the same labor market conditions. The sugar is the cover charge. The bagasse and the molasses and the filter cake are what make you wealthy. Now, the honest question. If the American sugar industry is this well protected, this well diversified, and this well subsidized, why do so many mills still fail? Why did Hawaii lose its entire sugar industry? The answer is in the last chapter, and it is a story of one mill, one island, and 145 years of history that ended on a single Thursday afternoon in December of 2016. For 145 years, the Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar Company grew cane on the Central Plains of Maui. At its peak, HC&S employed thousands of workers, controlled 36,000 acres, and shipped raw sugar to refineries on the mainland every year. The Punene Mill was the last commercial sugar mill in Hawaii. When it ground its final harvest in December of 2016, 145 years of Hawaiian sugar history came to an end in a single Thursday afternoon. Here is the mistake in the naive reading of that story. Most people assumed HC&S closed because sugar was dying globally. It was not. American sugar policy still protected the mainland industry. Florida and Louisiana kept grinding without missing a beat. What actually killed HC&S was geography colliding with 3 quiet structural problems that all the political protection in the world could not solve, no matter how many lobbyists they hired in Washington. The first problem was labor. Hawaiian labor cost roughly 2 to 3 times more than mainland cane labor, and Hawaii's minimum wage laws made H-2A visa arbitrage impossible. Every cutter, every truck driver, every mill operator cost more than in Florida. The second was the cogeneration angle. HC&S ran a cogen plant burning bagasse, and for decades that offset costs beautifully. Then Hawaii tightened its agricultural emissions rules. Compliance costs on cane burn practices climbed sharply. The third was scale. HC&S was one mill on one island, with no vertical integration into a mainland refinery, no consumer brand ownership, and no political weight in Washington that could tilt the farm bill in its favor. The result was a mill running on exactly the same business model as the Fanjuls, in a geography where none of the model's economics actually worked. Same design, different island, different ending. On the 12th of December 2016, the last cane truck rolled into Punene. The mill was decommissioned. 36,000 acres went dormant, and every mainland operator quietly took notes on what had just happened. Now let's look at the 2 scenarios you are actually choosing between when you sit down to buy a sugar operation today. and the gap between them is enormous, wider than most first-time buyers ever appreciate. Scenario 1. Optimum good. You acquire or inherit a vertically integrated operation. Roughly 15,000 acres of Florida cane, a fully modernized mill, an in-house refinery, a 100 megawatt cogen plant, and a consumer-facing brand. Annual revenue lands between $180 and $250 million. Sugar accounts for maybe 60% of that. Cogen adds 25 to 40 million in high-margin electricity sales. Molasses and specialty streams cover the rest. EBITDA margin runs somewhere between 22 and 28%. Cash flow goes negative for 4 to 5 months of the off-season, but a USDA-backed working capital line covers the gap without stress. If a boiler fails in January, you can afford emergency repairs without touching the credit line. If the farm bill is renewed, your allocation renews with it. You are stable, profitable, and slowly compounding wealth across generations. Scenario 2. Realistic. You buy a smaller independent raw mill, $60 to $90 million. Buying cane from independent growers, no in-house cogen at scale, no refinery, no consumer brand of your own. Revenue runs 60 to 90 million a year. EBITDA margin is thin, maybe 4 to 8% in a good year. You are one bad hurricane, one drought, one broken evaporator away from posting a loss for the season. You have no cogen income to smooth the seasonality. Your molasses is sold at commodity spot prices. Your working capital line is expensive because you have no cogen contracts to pledge as collateral to the bank. One bad season, and you are refinancing. Two bad seasons, and you are negotiating with the USDA about surrendering your allotment. Three, and you are the next Hawaiian commercial and sugar company writing your own last chapter. The gap between Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 is not effort. It is not skill. It is not even location. It is the presence or absence of vertical integration. And vertical integration is a decades-long accumulation of capital, quota, and relationships that a first-time buyer cannot replicate in a lifetime. The Fanjul's compound, HC&S, did not. Every family and every consortium that has ever owned an American sugar operation has landed on one side of that line or the other, and the line was almost always drawn on the day the mill was built. So let's come back to the picture we started with. The endless fields of cane in Florida, the trucks rolling through the night, the white smoke rising above the stacks, the sugar streaming out the other end. That picture is real. It is happening right now, this afternoon, somewhere south of Lake Okeechobee. But now you see what is actually flowing through those pipes, and it is not just sugar. It is a marketing allotment from the USDA that decides how much you are allowed to sell. It is a tariff wall keeping Brazilian cane from crossing your border. It is a Section 45 tax credit sitting inside every kilowatt of cogen output. It is a molasses contract with a distillery in Puerto Rico. It is a working capital line from a lender who understands that your revenue arrives twice a year and your costs arrive every single day of every single week. It is a seat at a table in Washington that was set in 1934 and has not added a new chair since. A sugar mill is not really about making sugar. It is about surviving the politics of who is allowed to sell it and turning everything else you were going to throw away into the business that actually pays the bills.